Steve, start with you. Both of these teams, after they pick whichever quarterback, have other quarterback decisions and moves that they probably would have to make after.
Yeah, Andrew, that could be a big deal by the time we finish this draft process. But let me kind of take you to a scene setter, what's going on here. As you mentioned, we're about 8 hours away from the draft. We've seen some of the team's personnel staff and some of the coaching staff start to show up for work, if you want to call it that. They know who the pick is going to be. They know about 8 hours from now that card will be turned in. And then it's pretty much off, so to speak, until they get into the later rounds. They have no Friday picks. But as you mentioned, if they draft Jared Goff, the quarterback from California, which we're expecting, how does that trickle down to the other three quarterbacks already on the roster, that being Case Keenum, Sean Mannion, and Nick Foles? You're not going to keep all four because at the very least, one would take reps away from the rookie quarterback. So at some point during this process, either through the draft or as we move closer to training camp, one of those players, most likely Nick Foles, could be drafted. Now, earlier this week, GM Les Snead said he's not talking about whether he's received any calls, but he said he did expect, as some of these draft picks come off the board, there could be some conversation from teams about them acquiring a veteran quarterback as they move on. Nick Foles could be a player who's in that mix, Andrew.
Nick Foles could be moving on. Coincidentally, he came into then St. Louis last year from Philadelphia, which is where we now find our Jeff Darlington live with the Eagles. They are picking number 2 overall. It is simple, Jeff, and yet it is complicated. It is simple that we think it's going to be Carson Wentz. It is then complicated with how they move forward.
Right, and let's point out a little bit of a timeline here, Andrew. I was exploring with a couple NFL sources whether they feel like the Eagles have to pull the trigger on a Sam Bradford trade today or perhaps even tomorrow. I get no sense that there's actually really any imminent deadline here because the fact that everybody already knows that the Eagles are going with the quarterback at number 2. So it's not exactly a surprise element or anything they have to do before that pick. They could potentially go through the entire weekend and still eventually trade Bradford. All that being said, I get no sense at this point that anyone is even close to moving in because the Eagles have a high price tag on Bradford at this point. The reason being, they still want Bradford here. That's been the plan all along. General Manager Howie Roseman wants to make sure that if it is Carson Wentz, that he gets the time to adapt himself to the NFL. So again, I don't see a trade happening. I certainly don't see a trade happening today, Andrew.
All right, but our eyes are open in case that does happen, and Jeff
No doubt.
Darlington is there. If the Eagles do move a quarterback, thought to be maybe Sam Bradford, who has made it clear this week through his agent Tom Condon, he wants out, and we are out with these two, back with Wyche and Darlington a little bit later in both L.A. and in Philadelphia.